Like I don't know. So I think the big value that people get is meeting
You don't. I've seen that. Alhamdulillah. It's going to be here. It makes my heart feel so happy to see you, alhamdulillah.
Do we have masks? A couple of people asking.
In that room right there? They may be, actually in my car.
Back seat? Front seat?
Yeah, in my car, there's actually a package of disposable masks. I'm parked right there. It's in the back seat. It's still sealed and everything. So, okay. Oh yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah, Detroit has that. Chicago has that. Old communities have that. Yeah. Alrighty, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Just before we get started, if you want to get some pizza, I know that we're like cutting into dinner time a little bit. There's pizza, there's some drinks over there. Please feel free to help yourself, inshallah. And there's also, I think, fruit snacks. They're halal, don't worry. We made sure. Just before anyone jumps on me. And, please feel free, inshallah. I don't want to take pizza home. So if you guys can devour that, it'd be appreciated. Alrighty. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. If anyone needs a mask or Hani has got a pack of masks, so he's going to be distributing. If you'd like one, please raise your hand, inshallah. We're on Hadith number 29. Hadith number 29. This Hadith is amazing. This Hadith is, all of them are, but this Hadith is profound. Because when you look at, it's important when you read a Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ to understand sort of like what's being said and also what's not being said, to read between the lines. And when you're able to pick up on those things, it gives you like depths and layers of meaning that you otherwise would not have had. So this hadith is narrated by Muadh bin Jabal radiallahu an. قال قلت يا رسول الله أخبرني بعمل يدخلني إلى الجنة ويباعدني عن النار. So he comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and in one narration, he said that I had this question burning inside of me that was causing me nausea. He said it was making me feel physically ill. This question was giving me so much, like when you're really nervous about something. So he was very nervous, and he was so nervous that he said that he started to develop like a stomach ache because he was so nervous about it. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, "Akhbirni bi'amalin, tell me about a deed, yudkhiluni, that would give me entrance into al-Jannah, wa yuba'idni an an-nar, that will distance me from the hellfire. So teach me about like what I can do to basically achieve this ultimate goal that I have in life." The Prophet ﷺ, he says, قال لقد سألت عن عظيم, you have asked me about something very, very huge. Like this is not going to be a short conversation. So he's preparing Muadh to basically get ready to receive the answer. But then he says, وَإِنَّهُ لَيَسِيرٌ عَلَى مَا يَسَّرَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. But even though it's this like massive thing, Allah, if a person wants, can make it easy for them. So you shouldn't lose hope. Even though he's prepping him by giving him like this like a weighty answer, he's like, if you do it, if you're sincere, Allah will make a way for you. And then he says, "Ta'bud Allah wa la tushrik bihi shay'a." The first thing is to worship Allah and not associate any partners with Him. Wa tuqimu as-salat, wa tu'tu az-zakat, wa tasumu Ramadan, wa tahujju al-bayt. That you fast, obviously Ramadan. You pray Salah, you give zakat, you fast Ramadan, and you make the Hajj. ثم قال ألا أدلك على أبواب الخير الصوم جنة والصدقة تطفي الخطيئة كما تطفي الماء النار. That he said, should I not tell you about the different pathways of goodness? He says that fasting is a shield, and charity extinguishes your sins just like water extinguishes fire. وَالصَّلَاةُ الرَّجُلِ مِنْ جَوْفِ اللَّيْلِ, and the prayer of a person as well in the middle of the night also extinguishes all of their sins. ثُمَّ تَلَا, and then he recited the verse, where Allah Ta'ala talks about prayer in the middle of the night. It's a long verse. He read the whole thing. Salam. ثم قال ألا أخبرك برأس الأمر. Should I not tell you about the top and the head of this whole thing? وعموده وذريتي. He says, should I not tell you about the top of this entire thing, the pillar of this entire thing? قلت بلى. Tell me, Ya Rasulullah, what is it? قال, he says, رأس الأمر الإسلام, and the pillar of this entire thing, as-salah. And then he says, wal-jihad, and struggling for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. ثم قال ألا أخبرك بملاك ذلك كله قلت بلى يا نبي الله فأخذ بلسانه قال كف عليك هذا. He says, should I not tell you about the source of all of this put together? The person said, Muadh said, yes, Ya Rasulullah. And he grabbed his tongue and he said, stopping this thing alone, stopping this. So Muadh becomes concerned and he says, هل يكب الناس في النار على وجوههم. I'm sorry. Before that, he says, sorry, this is a long hadith. I'm losing my spot in line. He says, وَإِنَّا لَمُؤَاخَذُونَ بِمَا نَتَكَلَّمُ بِهِ. Are we going to be held to account for the things that we say? And then the Prophet ﷺ says, فَقَالَ, he says, ثَكِلَتَكَ أُمُّكَ يَا مُعَاذ. May your mother lose you, which is basically him saying, yeah, of course. Are you serious? Without a doubt. Then he says, هل يكب الناس في النار على وجوههم أو على مناجرهم إلا حصائك. That have you not understood that the majority of people that will enter the hellfire will be thrown in on their faces only because of the reaping of what their tongues say. حصائك ألسنتهم, what their tongues reap. So it's a very long hadith. It took me 10 minutes to read to you guys. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit first, just context-wise, about some of the things that we know about this hadith before we start diving into the different parts of it. Number one, Muadh bin Jabal radiallahu an is somebody that the Prophet ﷺ has a very close relationship with. So we talked about this before because he narrated a previous hadith. Muadh is one of the only companions that the Prophet ﷺ said to him explicitly, I love you. And other companions became jealous of that, right? Because they had a very close relationship. Muadh bin Jabal radiallahu an was the companion that the Prophet ﷺ decided and chose to go be the Imam of the people of Yemen. When some of the tribes of Yemen converted to Islam towards the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said to Muadh, I need to send you there. And Muadh, it obviously was a great honor for him, but leaving Medina, leaving the Prophet ﷺ, it broke his heart, because when the Prophet ﷺ had that final conversation with him, he told him that when you come back, I will not be here. When you come back, I will not be here. And so it was very difficult for Muadh, but nonetheless, he was one of the closest students to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that they were very, very close. And some scholars say that the reason why the Prophet ﷺ said, I love you to him so much is because, sorry, the live just ended. The reason why he said, I love you to him so much is because of his knowledge, because he was a dedicated student. He showed up to class every day. He didn't come late. He didn't miss. I'm not subtweeting anybody. He didn't have any excuses. He was always there. And because of his dedication to the knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ had that love for him. So now that we know that about Muadh, it adds another layer to the hadith, because this isn't just some companion that we don't know or we've never heard of, or someone who's only spoken once. This is someone who has a lot of study under his belt. Like, he has a lot of content. So for him to come and ask this question, it shows you that, subhanAllah, like, in the Islamic corpus of knowledge, you can learn a lot. You can have a lot of information. But at the end of it all, there's going to be a question, which is, okay, can you just narrow down to me as a human being the things that I can actually do, the things that I can do? And in these things that I can do, can I walk away from it knowing that this is something that will give me paradise and save me from the hellfire? And this is something, by the way, that, like, Imam al-Ghazali in his favorite book, Dear Beloved Son, this was the prompt of the whole book. He had a student who stayed with him for 20 years, and he wrote him at the end of his time studying. He said, can you just give me can you give me the nectar of all of it? Like, I've spent 2 decades with you, but I feel like I have so much information. Sometimes I feel like I just need to be reset with the foundation of this, right? So Muadh is coming to the Prophet ﷺ, he's saying that can you just give me some deeds that will bring me closer to Allah and that will distance me from the hellfire? The Prophet ﷺ, he sees this and he recognizes that this is a very serious question because of the person who's asking. But also it shows you the kind of mindset the companions had. You know, if I opened up a Q&A right now, there would be a variety of people that would ask questions about a variety of topics. And some of them would be like very hypothetical in nature. Some of them would be maybe not even 100% practical, because that's just how we are, right? I mean, there's actually fiqh books that talk about, is it permissible for a person to marry a mermaid? Okay, I'm not making that up. Why? Because it was a question that was posed. So the scholars started to talk about it, like, well, is she more than half human? Is, you know, like they negate, you know, because especially the Hanafis are al-ra'i, so they're people of, you know, intellect, and they like to sort of mentally exercise with these things. But that's not to take a shot at the tradition, but what it means to be, or to say, what I mean to say by that is human beings have a tendency to tangent off into things that are impractical. The Prophet ﷺ one time was approached by a person and he said, Meta sa'a ya Rasulullah, when is the day of judgment? Give me the hour. When is it going to be? Right? Is it going to be next year? Is it going to be, is it going to be my lifetime? Again, for a lot of us, you could argue it's a practical question, but in reality, it's very impractical because the answer is unknown. So what does the Prophet ﷺ respond? He doesn't give any of the signs. He doesn't start talking about Dajjal. He doesn't start talking about, the arrivals on YouTube and like the Illuminati and everything. What does he start talking about? The Prophet ﷺ says, Ma addadta laha. What have you done for it? Because in his mind, he's like, I can give you the theory. I can give you all of that. I can give you the signs. And then every day you're going to be staring out your window, paranoid. Oh, like they're building towers. There they go again. And, the day of judgment's coming. I mean, this is half of like Muslim Twitter, right? Like this is the day. And it's true. The day of judgment is coming. But the answer is not whether or not you can recognize that it's coming. The answer is, did you pray? Right? Have you given your zakat this year? Did you fast? Because that's what's going to matter on the day of judgment. So the Prophet ﷺ had a very interesting way of redirecting people's hypothetical questions to practical advice. So Muadh comes and he asks a very vast question. And the Prophet ﷺ says, لَقَدْ سَأَلْتَ عَنْ عَظِيمٍ. You asked me that's a big deal. Okay? So he said, let me sit you down and let me tell you about what the answer is. So he begins by telling Muadh, radiallahu an, the first part, which is that you should always worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ta'budullah wa la tushrik bihi shay'a. Something that people probably take for granted is the fact that the shahada is, even though it's the first of the pillars and even though it's the one that is seemingly the easiest, it's actually the most difficult. And I do this a lot, so if you've heard it before, just forgive me. 5 pillars, what are they? You got one. We just said it. Okay, what else? Salah, good. Zakat, fasting, and Hajj. Okay, which one's the hardest? If you polled the entire Muslim Ummah, which one people say is the most difficult from start to finish, totality? Hajj. Very good. Thank you. All right. Some people go straight off. They're like, Salah. It is. I mean, the most difficult, because Hajj is like, it's a mission. Okay, you gotta pay a ton of money. You gotta give up all your PTO. You don't get to see your kids or family. You have to trust that your parents are going to take care of their grandkids, and they're not going to just feed them whatever they want and let them watch whatever they want. Like, there's a lot of stress, right? And as someone who goes to Hajj, alhamdulillah, and takes people on Hajj, like, you see it. There's a lot of stress. Very difficult, okay? That's not to say you shouldn't go. It is the most rewarding experience of your entire life, but it's tough, okay? And then after that, like, Ramadan is tough, right? May Allah Ta'ala give us Ramadan. It's very tough. And then after that, zakat is pretty tough, okay? And then after that, salah is pretty difficult. So all these things, to sort of fit them into a perfect equation, it's by no means easy. Shahada is kind of the one that we sort of just like let it slide. We're like, 105 is not bad, right? I got that one down. But if you think about it, Hajj is once in your life. Ramadan and zakat are once a year. Salah is 5 times a day, which is tough, but it's still not as difficult as shahada, which is like every moment that you live. Like every breath you take has to be a moment of recognizing Allah as your Lord. That's tough. Because when you think about it, taqwa is like a never-ending challenge. It's like reading a choose your own adventure book. Like at the end of every page, you have to make a decision. So at the end of every hour, you have to make a choice. Like, am I going to pray? Am I going to talk back? Am I going to look at it? Am I going to this? Am I going to do that? Like these are things that you engage with all the time. So shahada, in reality, even though it's the one that's sort of like the lowest in terms of its, it's the lowest in terms of its altitude. It's the longest in terms of its duration. Right? Hajj, you can put it together for 2 weeks. You can fake it till you make it. Right? Ramadan, we all are Ramadan Muslims in some way, shape, or form. All right. We don't pray Tarawih year round, right? Everyone here shows up for 20 rak'ah, and then like the day of Eid, we're like, Zakat, we can scrounge together our zakat. Salah, we can make it work. We try, we push, right? Maybe we get a few of them every day, try to get 5. Shahada is like a daily thing, dude. And so when we look at the 5 pillars, it's important to realize when the Prophet ﷺ starts with you should worship Allah alone, we shouldn't just look over that and say like, oh yeah, that's easy. Because it's not. It's really not easy to turn over all of your desires to Allah. It's a really difficult thing. When you're angry and you know it's better not to say something, like what choice do you make? Right? It's difficult. When you I'll never forget, like the first car that I ever bought, there was the first car that I negotiated for. I didn't buy it. And the reason I didn't buy it is because when I went to financing, I had told them I wanted 0 interest, and the guy wrote like 0.9. And I looked at him and I was like, I said 0. And he's like, that's basically 0. Right? Because they make, that's where they make some of their money from. And I was like, and I remember thinking in my head, I'm just like, have the pen there. And I'm like, no one's here right now. It's just me. I could do this and no one would care. Like no one would know. I'm not going to go to the masjid on Friday and be like, interest is okay. Don't worry about it. And I remember like how difficult it was in that moment to stick to my principles. Right? And we all have those moments. That's where your shahada really proves itself. Because shahada, right, from meaning to witness something, that you're a shahid, means that you're in every moment you live, you're trying to remember Allah Ta'ala as if you're witnessing him. Like, how do you act when you know that you're being watched? That's what shahada hopes to give to us. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ lists the 5 pillars. The reason why he lists these 5 pillars as the first is because this is what he says in the Hadith, Bunya al-Islamu ala khams. Islam is built upon 5 things. So everything else that you know about Islam, the 5 pillars are the things that need to be established. Okay. The 5 pillars are the things that need to be established first. Meaning there's a lot of important conversations, but if the 5 pillars are not firmly set, all these conversations are standing upon condemned land. Right? It's not going to work. And so when someone, for example, converts to Islam, like I remember my dad told me when he first converted to Islam, he was told like to change his name and to not eat certain foods and this, right? But he wasn't told about like the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. He wasn't told about all the foundations. And if anyone here, maybe you convert to Islam, maybe you have a similar experience. Hopefully you don't, but maybe you do, in that the focus is very different, right? Even in my experience, maybe in like a Saturday school or a Sunday school, the conversation tend to revolve around what? What was your Sunday school experience conversation? Yeah, haram, hellfire, this. Like, how many people were taught about salah in a way that was constructive and not destructive? So it's there's no mystery and there's no surprise that for a generation of people that were not taught about the 5 pillars in a way that was really robust and constructive, that faith crises are like a dime a dozen. Right? And it's not to blame anybody, but it's just the way that it works. The Prophet ﷺ gave us a priority. He gave us a sequence, and it's like we skipped it. Right? We're more concerned about the quality of like the receipts of a restaurant's meat, which again is not a serious problem, but more so than we're concerned about whether or not we woke up for Fajr that day, which is a more higher priority on the list of things that we need to look at. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ starts with priority. And this is an important answer. It's an important part of his answer. His pedagogy is very strong. His methodology is very important. When you look at yourself and you look at things in your life and you want to build yourself up towards Allah, you have to start from the ground up. Right? It may be enticing and it may be alluring to start seeking knowledge that's very fancy, that's quotable, to start having conversations that puts you in different circles, right? Like, they call it a cocktail party. For Muslims, we'll do mocktail party, right? Conversations. But it's not very easy for a person to commit to learning the basics, especially when you're at this stage in life. That's why Wednesday nights here, shameless plug, we just started last week 2 classes. Number 1 is reading the Quran for adults. So if a person cannot recognize Arabic letters, great, welcome. This is where in 10 weeks you're going to learn how to read the Quran. Okay? And then we also did pillars, which is like a college style course on the 5 pillars. Not just pray, but where did prayer come from? How did it start? What verses initiated the prayer? How do I pray? What about these differences of opinion that I've come across? Because again, we could try to be like intermediate and advanced Muslims, but if we haven't mastered the beginner stages, we're going to eventually fall apart. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ, he starts with that. Then he moves forward and he says that, should I not inform you after that of abwab al-khair, the different doors or the different gates or pathways of goodness? So Muadh, he says, yeah, of course, right? This is for him, this is like a dream come true. Because the Prophet ﷺ would very rarely give a long answer. People would come up to him with a question, they would ask a question, and he would give a short answer, and they're waiting, and he's like, that's it. Because his whole thing was, I don't want to bore people, I don't want to tire them out, okay? Which I'm very good at. So he says, should I not give you the gates of goodness, or lead you to the gates of goodness? So Muadh says, Bala, of course, please give them to me. The Prophet ﷺ, he said they are fasting, which is a shield. As-sawmu junnatun. That fasting is something that protects you. And this is why, by the way, I'm so excited for Ramadan. This is why the concept of Ramadan and changing and becoming somebody who you're not normally is actually from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. You guys know what I'm talking about? You guys ever heard the phrase Ramadan Muslims? Typically used as a condescending term, right? These people don't even come here outside of Ramadan. They're just Ramadan Muslims. The interesting thing is that we have a hadith from Aisha radiallahu anha where she tells us that the Prophet ﷺ's behavior also changed in Ramadan. So, I mean, I'm not going to extend the label, of course, because it's disrespectful. But if your definition of Ramadan Muslim is somebody who does something different in Ramadan, you're in good company. Because the Prophet ﷺ was described as being the most generous, and Aisha said, and in Ramadan, he was even more generous. So something changed his behavior. And part of what changes behavior in Ramadan is fasting, engaging in the fast. Now, Imam Ghazali has different levels of fasting. So there are people, obviously, the base layer that everybody who has the ability to, health and age, is fasting from food and drink and intimacy from dawn till sunset. But then Imam Ghazali says there's other levels of fasting, like the fasting of the tongue, where the person doesn't say anything that's displeasing to Allah when they know that they shouldn't be, right? Similar to Hajj. Right? That there's no argument and there's no vulgarity during Hajj. So fasting is a state of being in which a person shouldn't even say things that would be displeasing to Allah. Then there's another layer of fasting, which is working on the person's consciousness, their thoughts. What are the things that we think? So as you can see, the first layer of just not eating and not drinking, as hard as it is actually, according to this scale, like the entry point. Because there are people who fast all day and then the backbiting still rolls. May Allah forgive us. And then there's people who can actually hold their tongue, but the judgment of people still kind of flows. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said there are people who fast Ramadan and all they gain is hunger. And there are people who pray all night and all they get is tired. There's no actual reward being harvested because they're missing the spirit of this entire action. So how then is fasting a shield? Why is fasting directly tied to taqwa? You tell me. How does fasting change you? Are you guys better when you're fasting? Better Muslims?
You're more God-conscious in every movement and thought.
Okay, very good. How? Why are you more God-conscious? Sorry if I look at the wrong person. I can't tell because the masks are good, but I'm just like looking at how are you more God-conscious?
Because you're making that effort to be a better Ramadan Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, for me, I try doing better so that I can gain more reward. And, you know, in Ramadan, for every good deed, you get 10 times the reward.
Sure.
You're just more conscious of like the positive and things like that.
Yeah, there's like a mentality. It's almost like a Black Friday mentality. You're like, okay, this is a limited time offer, and I have to capitalize as much as I can, right? So you know that Ramadan is not going to be forever, and you want to take advantage of it, right? In part because maybe the rest of the year wasn't as exemplary as you wanted it to be, and so you're like, I need to take advantage of this. Very good. How else? Why does Allah could have taken away anything, but He took away food and drink? You guys ever think about that? You guys like eating?
Makes you appreciate your blessings.
Okay, good. It
Makes you kind of realize how insignificant we are.
Okay.
We get so fueled by hunger and thirst, and that we're animals in a way, but like we make ourselves this arrogant
Mm.
thing, but it's like no, we're really just these lesser things without his provisions.
You take away food and all of a sudden you're like this like insatiable angry person, hangry, right? Or you take away coffee, yeah, and you like can't function, right? Like there's like this entire section of Kohl's dedicated to t-shirts, like not until I have my coffee, right? So it's really an illustration of وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. We created human beings weak. Allah's not insulting you. He's not like, look at you, you weakling. But he's saying part of your nature is that you do have these requirements. And if you remove those requirements, like you're not so big and bad, are you anymore? Right? So it's true. And it's not an easy thing to hear, guys. It's really difficult. A lot of tazkiyah is like not easy to hear. But it's true. It's true. SubhanAllah. Like we take away food and drink, and all of a sudden we're like, the Snickers commercials. Literally, I mean, it's a perfect example of Ramadan. People become crazy, and then they have a bite of Snickers and they're back to their normal selves. So Allah is showing us by removing food and drink what you are without all the luxuries you have, who you really are in some ways. Okay, what else? Why is fasting? Yeah.
Adding on to hunger, one thing I noticed, like when I'm fasting, there's food in front of me. I physically have the opportunity to eat. Like I'm not physically deprived from it.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes me think about the people who don't have that choice. Like, I have the choice to just grab a cookie and eat. But there are people who, whether they want or not, they don't have to starve.
Yeah, subhanAllah. It puts you in a position of reflection. And back to your point as well, like you have the ability to go eat if you want to. Like if you really wanted to, you could just go and take a bite of, whatever by yourself. You could tell people that you're traveling, right? I'm traveling, like from my bedroom to the kitchen, and you break your fast. And really you could. No one's watching over you. And that's why Ramadan is so powerful, because in a way it's kind of like the moment of truth. And for those people who fast and maybe they can't fast, maybe they can't fast for the reasons of health, but for those people who fast at any level, it's almost like an annual check-in with Allah. Like, I'm still here. I still mean it. I'm not perfect, but I still mean it. And so it's interesting how he says that as sawmu junnah, and siyam, by the way, doesn't only mean food, because when Maryam alayhi salam was having Isa and she was going to be challenged by her community, Allah Ta'ala commanded her to fast from speaking, to say inni nadartu sawma, that I'm observing siyam from speaking. I'm not going to talk. So siyam is like a much wider definition, but it's a shield. It's a shield from making bad choices. It's a shield from doing the things that you shouldn't do, because you cannot ignore your state of fasting. You cannot ignore the pangs of hunger. You cannot ignore the thirst, the dryness of your throat and your stomach. It's impossible to ignore. You can ignore a lot of things. You can't ignore hunger and thirst. It's very, very difficult. People ignore all types of stuff. If you go buy cigarettes at the airport, on the packaging, it's like, this will kill you. And people are like, 2, please, And they have to because of federal regulations. But we can ignore all type of stuff. You can't ignore hunger and thirst. It's Allah Ta'ala will just shut your body down as a result of that, right? So that's how it serves as a shield. The next thing the Prophet ﷺ says is that, and charity extinguishes sins like water extinguishes fire, as well as the prayer of a person in the middle of the night, which also extinguishes sins. So charity, have you guys ever grown up under the culture of giving charity as a result of a sin? Like you did something, or there was something that happened and your parents be like, give charity, give sadaqah. Okay. So this is where that comes from. It comes from the idea that sadaqah is something that is done. It's interesting. It's done for a variety of reasons. Obviously the charitable aspect of it is one thing, but the Prophet ﷺ, when he talks about the importance of you giving charity, he rarely talks about without you, people will starve. You guys ever realize that? When you read of the verses of charity and the hadith about charity, Allah is not basically putting the salvation of people on you. because we believe that Allah will take care of everybody, right? And whether or not you give or someone else gives, like that money's getting to them. And there have been countless moments where I've seen this in real life, where people are like, asked to give money, they say no, and then someone follows up right behind them and gives double what they would have given. So Allah Ta'ala will provide, right? But it's interesting because charity is taught to us not as a way for us to help others, but a way for us to help ourselves. Because charity is one of the things that you can do that truly displays your trust in Allah. Because who likes to give away money, right? Especially in this economy, right? You're not even catching up with inflation. We just talked about how you can't find a house in Dallas. There just are no houses. I'm just going to start living here, right? Like that's just, no one wants to give away money. Yeah, Allah said, وَتُحِبُّونَ الْمَالَ حُبًّا جَمًّا. You love money. It's something that He created us with. I mean, one of the Arabic synonym for money is khair, goodness. Okay? Everyone loves money. So who wants to part with it? Well, nobody. But when you do, it's like that moment where you tell Allah, like, I love you more than I love this. And so I'm parting with this. The second thing is that you display your trust, because the Prophet ﷺ said, مَا نَقَصَ مِنَ الْمَالِ صَدَقَةً. You'll never lose money from charity. And so when you engage in charity, you're like testing this theory. You're like, okay, I'm going to give. Am I going to be able to pay rent this month? Am I going to be broke because I gave? And somehow, some way, right? Sadaqah Rasulullah, he never lied. Somehow, some way, it comes back to you. In fact, never even in the amount you gave, but always more, because Allah is more generous than us. So you give, and Allah repays always more than that. Test it. I'm not gonna back it, like me personally, right? But it will be backed. Okay, if you test it, you'll see it. And Allah Ta'ala, by the way, gives wealth in different ways. It doesn't always come in the form of checks. Sometimes it comes in the form of protecting you from things that otherwise would cause you expenses. Okay, so sadaqah extinguishes sins. It takes away the sins that a person committed. You know why giving sadaqah is very important as well? Because there are sins that we committed that we forgot that we even committed. And so us asking Allah to forgive those sins is difficult because we can't even register that we did them, right? You can ask for forgiveness for things you remembered, but what about the things you forgot about? The things that you did in between the big sins, the small ones. Those are the ones that Imam Ghazali said are really going to sink you. He said the big ones everyone's on the lookout for, so they're very cautious about not committing the big ones. But it's the small things that we do that add up. It's the pebbles that continuously keep going. It's a small leak that destroys the house. So Imam Ghazali says, those small sins that don't even register, when you give charity every week or every day or whatever it might be, you're ensuring that you've extinguished those sins, even the ones that you can't remember. And that's why we make dua to Allah. We say, oh Allah, forgive me for the sins that I know and the ones that I don't know, right? Forgive me for the mistakes that I made that I know about and the ones that I don't know about. And he said also praying in the middle of the night. Praying in the middle of the night, fi jawfil layl, it actually means specifically in the part of the night that is the darkest, where no one can see you. So the scholars say two things about this. They say that you can pray in the middle of the night. That's the best. But the function is not only timing, it's also to make sure that you're alone. So if you pray in the middle of the night, but you're like, you wake up everybody to watch you, you've not established this. Okay, or you make a lot of noise along the way. If you have like a metal lota and it just falls, all right, that's not how you establish this. The real function here behind praying in the middle of the night, beyond the fact that it's a special time, is that it's also the time when people are typically sleeping, so you can get your true moments of sincerity in. Because out of 100, everything we do that's observable, always there's going to be a little bit of a struggle, even 1%, with true sincerity. Always. Right? Maybe if someone saw you do something good in your head, you're like, well, now this person, like, oh, wow, I look good to this person or something. Or you're donating and people watch you and they say takbir and then the fundraiser makes dua for you and all that. There's a lot of people watching at that moment. So praying alone when no one's there, not even your family, your kids, your spouse, etc., just by yourself, it unlocks a part of you that otherwise is very difficult to access. Right? And because that sincerity is key there. So he mentions that. He calls these literally the doors of goodness. If you're looking for goodness in your life, ask about fasting, charity, and your tahajjud. What's the status of those three things? If you want more goodness, which we all do, then we have to at least pick one, if not two. And if we can do three, that's like all-star level. But we can all leave here being more charitable. We can all commit to fasting. I mean, it's in now, intermittent fasting. Just make your niyyah and go, right? intermittent fasting is niyyah, it's problematic. So just make it for Allah, right? And then also tahajjud. You know, an easy way for tahajjud to practice this, and my mom actually told me this a long time ago, is very, very helpful, is to build up to it like training wheels, which is basically every night before you go to sleep, the last thing you do, just get something in. 2 rak'ahs if you could. I know we'll do it sometimes as a hard bargain. If you have it, make it. If you don't, then at least sit on your prayer rug and make dua. Make dua in that moment. Just sit there, face the qibla, and just make dua to Allah. That will be, inshallah, considered from like the baby steps of tahajjud. And then what ends up happening slowly is you kind of start to fall in love with the experience of it. And then you start to maybe do it once a week, once a month, let's say. And then after once a month, you start to develop the habit of it. And there are people that I know personally that have told me, like, I didn't even pray the 5 prayers. I started by praying tahajjud, and then I got to my 5 prayers. And I was like, however you got to do it, right? But that's how they started. Because why? They were looking for that sincerity. And once they unlocked that, they were like, this is addictive. This is very nice. You know, I love having these private moments with Allah. And then that cascaded down to their 5 daily prayers. Okay, so then he recited the verse that Allah Ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, those who forsake their beds, meaning they leave their sleep so that they can go pray. Now the Prophet ﷺ shifts. He shifts the conversation to what is like from the foundation, and then literally he says, Ra'sul Amr, what's the head of this issue, of this affair? So Muadh radiallahu an, he says, yes, tell me about what the head of this issue is. And the Prophet ﷺ responds to him and says that the head of this issue is, sorry, let me go back and get the exact wording. Okay, is submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is submitting to Allah. What does submission mean? Anybody? Oh, that's really nice. Good job, Newman. Yeah, relinquishing control, letting go. Submission is basically when you allow something to direct you or drive you. Okay, so when it comes to like submission with, you know, anything in reality, right? Like you can go with the flow. That's a good way of understanding it. One of my friends used to say, like, I used to fight the wave, and now I try to ride the wave. So Allah Ta'ala is asking us to do certain things. Submitting is not resisting those things. The amount that we submit is the amount that we are like in congruence with those things. In the beginning, it's a very fake it till you make it mentality, which is internally, I'm struggling, but I know I have to do this. Like the entry point of Islam is very much like, I don't want to go to hell. I'm going to pray because I really don't want to go to the hellfire. But then afterwards, there's a relationship that develops with Allah in which a person says, well, it's not just about fear anymore. Now I've graduated beyond fear. And now I actually really value this because I see the results it's having on me. When I pray, I'm more patient. When I pray, I'm more understanding. I have better perspective. I'm taking breaks throughout my day and I'm connecting with Allah. That's Iman. And then the final level, Ihsan, according to Hadith Jibreel, is when a person is doing it because they know it's what Allah loves. Okay? So there are people who in their relationships, the function of their relationship is fear. Like, I will spend time with you because I don't want you to be upset with me. Or I will call you, or I will invite you over because I don't want you to get angry with me. Right? Then the next level is, well, no, I benefit from this relationship. Like, you make me laugh and you cook food and you're generous and this or that, or you have connections, right? So the relationship, I'm seeing husbands and wives like laughing. All right. So beyond that, right? There's a tangible reward that's given, but the highest level of relationship is when you do it simply because you love that person. Like, it's irrelevant. Hey, what do you want to do? It doesn't matter to me. As long as I'm with you, we're good. You want to go watch a movie? Well, your choice, right? You want to hang out? Doesn't matter. And we all have those friends that like sweatpants on the couch is like just as fun as going on a road trip. Just as fun as taking going traveling somewhere. It's just as enjoyable because it's not about the environment. It's not about the experience of doing something. It's about the company. Okay. Now, if we translate that scale over to Allah, many people have a relationship with Allah out of fear. Many have a relationship with Allah out of seeking something from Him, dua, and which is good. All of these are valid. But then there's that one level that we all aspire to have, which is, oh Allah, like I just want to know you because I love you. And that's like the highest level where there's no conditions for it. A person doesn't get upset when their du'as aren't answered. It doesn't bother them. Because when you love somebody, you trust them. And you're like, you know what? I made dua for that thing. But oh Allah, I love you and I trust you. And if you didn't give it to me, like, I get it. I'm with you. You know what I mean? Like, you know me better than I know myself. I asked you for that job. I asked you for that person. I asked you for that house, whatever. And you didn't give it to me. I'm not upset. If your relationship is purely based off of give take, then you get upset. You struggle a little bit. And if your relationship is based off of fear, then there's a lot of resentment, right? So Muslims, we all aspire to have that highest level so that eventually, no matter what happens in our life, we look at Allah and we're like, Tawakkaltu ala Allah. Like, I trust you completely. I have no doubt whatsoever. Doesn't matter what you send me my way, it's good. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, Ajaban li amri al-mu'min. How amazing is it, every single thing that happens in the life of the believer, that when Allah Ta'ala sends them good, shakar, the person's grateful. And when Allah tests them, sabr, the person is patient. That's like the ideal, the pinnacle of this. So that is what submission feels like. Submission is like a rare taste where, and sometimes Izzuddin Abdus Salam, he says, Allah removes your ability to even choose your own outcome so that you can get a taste of what submission feels like. You know what I mean? Sometimes Allah Ta'ala takes away your choices so that you have to submit. And then when you come out of that moment in your life alive and well, and dare I say thriving, all of that doubt you had before that moment, you're like, oh, you know what? Allah knew the whole time. Why did I even doubt him for a second? How embarrassing. How ashamed should I be that I even thought that Allah would not take care of me for this, right? Like you're running late to a flight and you're freaking out. And you're like, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. I'm going to miss it. And you show up and the person at the check-in counter is Muslim because it's DFW, right? And you're like, Assalamu alaikum khaltu. And she's like, come on, right? She opens the door for you. It happened to me, true story, by the way, right? I thought for sure I'm done. And then I was like, why did I even doubt Allah for a second? And you know what? If I did miss it, if it wasn't a Muslim, if it was like Ann Coulter and or her sister, and I had to like, and it just, I missed it, I still trust it, right? I still trust it. I don't want my relationship with Allah to be dependent on how I feel that day. I want my relationship to be Allah to be dependent upon how He is with me every day, which is way too kind, way too generous, way too much. And that's why submission is just the logical answer. It's the logical reality. Okay. And then he says the pillar, the umud of submission is prayer. Prayer is I always tell people, everyone here has love languages. You guys know your love language? Verbal affirmation, acts of service, gifts, physical touch, and quality time, right? You guys know your love language? You should know your love language. There's probably more. I don't know. Alhamdulillah. Is your love language us saying Alhamdulillah to you? No, some people love, for example, like you love gifts. Some people actually don't really care about gifts. I'm actually not a very big gift person. Just FYI. Some people, physical touch is not really their thing. Quality time. Some people, they really love to have those words of affirmation, that compliment of that praise that they're looking for. Allah's love language is salah. That's what He wants. Like you could do a billion different things for Allah, but Allah, according to what He told us, His preference is a salah. That's why the Hadith says on the Day of Judgment, the first thing Allah is going to look at is the prayer. If it's okay, everything else is going to be just fine. All the other critical mistakes that we make, all the vulnerabilities, all the weaknesses, all the neglect, all of that. If the salah is good, Allah is so focused on that salah for us because of why? He doesn't need it because of what He knows that it does for us. This is what the Prophet is saying. You want to truly submit to Allah, you have to start with prayer. And what better way for people who are 30 and up with back pain and knee pain and no sleep and you name it, right? No sleep, or kids, same thing. What better way for us to submit to Allah by taking the most valuable commodity we have, our time, and carving out for Allah 5 times a day. It's beautiful. You wake up for Allah, and before you go to sleep, you spend time with Allah, and in the middle of the day, you carve out 3 chances for you to spend time with Allah. This is why the Prophet ﷺ called it rest, right? So it's the pillar of submission. And then he says, and the highest point of this relationship with Allah is jihad. And here, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, he translates this and he says that this is talking about when a person, as Allah Ta'ala describes in Surah Hujurat, inna al-mu'minuna alladhina jahadu bi amwalihim anfusihim, that they give their entire existence to Allah, like their entire life, their entire whatever their wealth, they know it's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's like the apex of existence, right? And you meet people like this, by the way. A lot of us think that this might be something far out of reach. But you know what this looks like? This looks like maybe you guys had this like in your family, like your parents. Have your parents ever done something? Have they ever committed for the sake of the masjid something really crazy? Like you can borrow my car for like 2 weeks, or they let people come and stay in your house, or they cook for an iftar of like 500 people. You guys ever heard those stories? That's what it means to give it all. Like you give everything you got. And you actually like give before you've even figured out the back end of it. This is like what Abu Bakr did. When Abu Bakr radiallahu anh came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he gave everything he had in terms of wealth at that moment, he emptied his bank account and he gave it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "What do you have left for your family?" He said, "Allah and His Messenger." Like that's all they need. Now, not everyone's there. There were other companions that tried to do the same thing. They tried to flex that way, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Take half." Right? Because their faith wasn't comparable to Abu Bakr's faith. But Abu Bakr displays what it means to truly give it all for Allah. Truly, right? And this is something that your scale is different for each person. You know what it means to give it all for Allah. Like, right? For some people, it might be that really difficult conversation with HR about Fridays for Jummah. And that's, I know we have launch good staff here, mashallah. Hopefully your CEO doesn't make you work on Jummah, right? But the reality is that that's a really tough thing to do. You got a new job. It's difficult. You don't want to automatically go in, hey, by the way, Friday, I kind of need like a half day every Friday. Till when? Forever. Like you don't want to that's not how you want to start off. Even if you negotiate, I'll come in an hour early every day. I'll make up the time, whatever. It's not how you want to. But and I know that prayer, that Jummah, that khutbah, and that salah with the community, sometimes it's the only thing that we have that week. And as much as I would like to, keep my head down, stay in line, not disturb the order of corporate America, I know how important that experience is for me. Okay? There are people, this is beautiful, by the way, a hack for Ramadan. I know people that have taken off the odd nights of the last 10 nights from work, or the day after, or whatever, however they calculated it, so that they could take those 4 or 5 days and they could go to the masjid and spend the night there and worship Allah. Again, could you go to the Maldives for Eid with those 5 days? Like, are you taking those PTO in another way? You could have gone on vacation. You could have done something else. Yeah, of course. But that's what it means to give it all for Allah. Like, that's your priority. So that's the way that Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, he translates it. And then he finishes this hadith. I'm sorry, it's so long, but it's profound. He says, should I not tell you of what controls everything? Like everything. And Muadh says, Bala. And the Prophet ﷺ, he grabs his tongue and he says this. And Muadh bin Jabal, he says, is it the case that we're going to be held to account for the things that we say? And the Prophet ﷺ says, it's an Arabic expression, may your mother lose you, which is an Arabic way of saying like, absolutely, are you crazy? Right? And he says, yes, without a doubt, this is going to be one of the reasons why the most people are going to be entering the hellfire is because of their tongue. And in the commentary here, the commentator quotes, Ibn Rajab says, Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Qaf, مَا يَلْفِظُ مِنْ قَوْلِ إِلَّا لَدَيْهِ رَقِيبٌ عَتِيدٌ. Not a single thing leaves the mouth of a person except that it is written down in a record that is maintained. I'll stop here. There's one line that I'll leave you with that I thought was profound. I read it this week. Imam Ghazali wrote about this, and he said that when it comes to the tongue, he says that there's a lot of people that, they do good things. They say nice things, they pray, they make dhikr, they make dua, etc. But then after all that's done, they talk a lot of crap. I'm just going to be very blunt. I know I'm being loud. I apologize for people who think, like, who's that guy? They talk a lot, right? And it's like, they lie or backbite or slander, whatever. And this is something that, again, we all battle with. Imam Ghazali says something very powerful. He says, if it were the case that you had to sacrifice all of the tasbihat and all of the tahmid and all of the tahleel and everything that you did, all the dua that you made that day, but you were just able to keep your mouth shut and not transgress upon someone, you'd be better off not saying anything than you would be saying all that good stuff and then spoiling it later. You guys feel how heavy that is? He says you would be better off just being quiet forever than you would be having the other side of the coin show up in the later half of the day. In the morning, you're making dua, making dhikr, etc. Then at night, you're with your friends, and we start talking about everybody. He says, just if you had to make a choice, you wake up in the morning, what am I going to do? If you know that your lips are going to start rolling off and whatever, and again, this isn't talking about things like therapy or constructive criticism or talking to HR, right? I'm not talking about silencing people who are being abused, or that those are exceptional cases. I'm talking about just the person who is able to turn lemonade back into lemon somehow in every scenario that they're in. They say turn lemons into lemonade. I appreciate the one guy laughing. It was a really good joke. I worked really hard on it, okay? I'm a dad, right? This is it. They're somehow able to take any situation, no matter how sweet, and make it sour. And just, do you see what she's wearing? Do you see what do you see that? Do you see? And just go and just attack, just verbally assault people. Imam Ghazali says, you've undone all the good you did by doing that. Don't spoil it, right? Remember what the Prophet ﷺ said when there was a statement made, right? When there was a statement made. The Prophet ﷺ was a very powerful man. He said that and he was speaking, by the way, to his wife. He said that if you took the word that you said and put it into the ocean, it would have spoiled it. Like, that's the toxicity that language can have. So comments, screenshots, all this stuff, it falls under this category. You have to be very careful, because words cannot be forgiven or forgotten even as easily as like bruises and cuts can be forgiven and forgotten. Like, I got scratched a couple times and they're already almost healed. When they're gone, I'll forget they ever existed, but I won't forget the words that someone said. It's very difficult to forget those things. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ, of course, I'm doing a really bad job at teaching this, but it's a lot more complex and a lot more far-reaching than that. But my goal tonight was to summarize as much as I could. We ask Allah Ta'ala to give us the characteristics of the people of heaven, people of Jannah. We ask Allah Ta'ala to allow us to benefit from the same advice that the Prophet ﷺ gave Muadh, and that we're able to do these actions that bring us closer to him, and that we're able to do these actions that take us further away from the hellfire. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Does anyone have any questions or anything at all before we? Someone said instead of saying crap, I should have said bakwas. You're right. I should have. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. We'll wrap up there. Jazakumullah khairan. So just a heads up, we do have our event on Friday called Chai Chat, which is our new, not quite monthly, but it'll be like a regular thing where we watch or read or we discuss some piece of media, whether it's like a documentary or a piece of literature or like a poem or a news article. Oh, they give us light. Alhamdulillah, thank you. At the end. And it's supposed to be this Friday. However, you guys all, I'm sure, have heard about the weather forecast and stuff like that, and we're in Dallas. So the only salt in this place is on your table. So they don't have any way to help us on the roads. If the weather is inclement and you were planning on coming to Chai Chat, we will postpone. Inshallah, we'll just push it either a week or two. We'll let you know. But just letting you know now that Netflix might be the move on Friday night. Inshallah, in your own home. Inshallah. Okay? All right. Jazakumullah khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.